Hi, welcome. I'm here with my longtime friend, and I will say an inspiration to me for many, many years, Alexis Fink. Alexis, how are you doing today?
Al, I am doing great. I have been looking forward to this conversation.
I am too, and you're at this inflection point in your career that I've observed anyway. I mean, you are now entering into the title of past president of PsyOp.
Mhm.
You're formerly leading workforce strategy at Meta, and you've had a storied career in the space, call it of people analytics or IO psychology. Can you share just a little bit about your background as well as what we're going to be talking about today?
Sure. I have had the deep pleasure to fall backwards into a profession that was just emerging, that I happened to finish a PhD in about 15 years before it got cool, which is just absent having a time machine. There's no way you ever could have planned that. So I do have a PhD in industrial organizational psychology. I've been working around this space now for longer than I care to admit, but I've had the privilege to do this kind of work in some amazing places. I spent about 8 years at BASF, which is the world's largest chemical company, doing factory reinvention and business process work. Spent almost 8 years at Microsoft doing all kinds of things in the people analytics space. That shop has just been amazing, and it was an incredible part of my career. Moved over and spent almost 7 years at Intel, and I got to build some really advanced analytical work there. And then the last 6.5 years of my career have been as VP of People Analytics and Workforce Strategy at Meta. I graduated from that role the same time my youngest child graduated from college, so it was really graduation season around here. I am
Congratulations.
now in my post corporate season. I've given myself the summer off, and now I am really enjoying writing and spending time with old friends and starting to spin up some projects that feel intellectually challenging and also feel like they really matter at this moment in work, right? We're at this incredible inflection point. So I could not think of a more fun thing to be doing.
Well, I mean, that leads into the topic of our conversation today, because obviously AI is not only all over the news and gaining the attention of individuals, because it is a consumer product as well as a value proposition for organizations. And many are confused, distracted, and stuck, but others are, empowered and doing some things that are really cool. So what is your core philosophy around the use of AI? And to lead the question or the answer a little bit, some are really scared and okay, this is not going to be good for society and potentially workers. And on the other hand, there's those who say this is the best thing that's come along since potentially anything. So, your thoughts?
You know, that's a great question to start with. And I think that I have kind of a perspective that it's a tool like any other. And the analogy that a lot of people use is it's like a knife can be used for murder or to cure cancer, right? It depends on the approach that you take, the problems that you solve, and some of the scaffolding that you put around it as a society and as an individual. I know for myself, I've been using this stuff for years. I built my first agent-based simulation in 2001, right? My dissertation back in the 90s was AI stuff for NASA, which makes me sound smarter than I am. But I have been working on automating factories, automating business processes. Some of the work that we did at Intel now, going back almost 10 years, was using optimization models and skills extraction to help people who'd been displaced from their jobs land new roles in the company. And we almost tripled the rate at which we were able to land people whose jobs had been eliminated. Those things really matter. And I think that those are positive societally. And I think that there are, of course, risks, as there are with any technology, but the upside is tremendous. And for the first time in the last few years, we, as you mentioned, have really made these into consumer facing technologies. I think I have five AI tools that sit on my phone, and I use some of them every single day. Before I get out of bed in the morning, I read through the digest, the custom digest. Actually, I have three of them set up, but there's one custom digest that gets delivered to me at five in the morning, and It's the first thing I read when I wake up before I brush my teeth, right? There are just all kinds of little ways that this can be infused into your life as a person. And then I think you and I will talk about the transformative potential it has to really transform, use that word twice, the transformative potential it has to improve work and to make work more efficient, to make work more accurate. I came out of a manufacturing environment, so to make work safer for both the workers and for the environment and the community around them, there's just enormous, enormous potential here if we can harness it well.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing all that because I share both your optimism and both your concern, it sounds like, as well. The idea that adoption has been the focus of the past couple years, AI adoption, and of course, there's research that shows that the adoption hasn't happened, and it invites the question, and you've spoken about this, you've written about this, what the heck does adoption mean anyway? And is that the worthwhile goal? Is there something deeper? So can you speak to your position on the notion of adoption and what lies beyond that?
Boy, that's a great question. I think adoption is an interesting question because there's a levels of analysis problem. There's individual level adoption. So how many people have 5 of these things sitting on their phone that they use all the time or talk to? A lot of it's involuntary. If you do a Google search now, it's going to give you the AI results. So to a certain extent, you can't get away from it. If you're watching Netflix, it's giving you AI-based recommendations for its AI designed shows, right? Like there's a certain amount of adoption that's involuntary. On the other hand, enterprise level adoption has been a little uneven. And so where are those enterprise projects that are really delivering business value that a CFO or a shareholder would be able to identify? Those things that show up in decreased costs, increased revenue, increased speed, increased quality, all of those things that are really valuable. Those are a little slower to come because they're a lot harder than just purchasing an LLM and turning them on. Individual adoption also has some barriers that corporate adoption doesn't, in that there's resistance. And there are some folks who will feel either intimidated by technology or they will feel like they are maybe furthering their own demise. So there's individual adoption barriers that enterprises don't have. And on the other hand, there's enterprise adoption barriers that individuals don't have. And those enterprise adoption variables or barriers include all the change management, looking at the rest of the business process. And we're starting to hear even, golly, I saw a TV advertisement that was sort of suggesting, oh, sure, you've solved this one tiny part of a business process. Can I say the whole business process is 20% better now? Wait. No, that's not true. I made this a little bit better. Does that mean that the whole thing is better? And I remember years ago, an executive was talking about this problem and sort of saying it's like being one car on a 5-mile long train. And it doesn't matter how perfect and well lubricated and balanced my train car is, I still have to wait for the entire train to get to my destination. And so we're kind of seeing some of that in this AI work. We're really optimizing this one little train car. In order to see the business value, we're going to have to look at the entire train.
God, I love that metaphor, and it invites several questions, and I'm going to ask one at a time because that's, I guess,
Okay.
a best practice. And I want to highlight that your friend Tomas Chamorro for Music has a question coming up that relates to, I think, the
Oh
recent
gosh.
work that you all did. But the idea you mentioned earlier, units of analysis, and
Yeah.
you also talked about, in my language, but different personas, different levels, different job families. And so these distinctions, in my view, matter. And what
Yes.
happens in many cases that there's these generalizations made, and it presents risk that I believe can be mitigated with proper governance and decision making and getting people in the room consuming insight about what is actually happening. In other words, studying behavior, actually involving employees in the design process, potentially. your thoughts on the notion of who is assessing how to implement AI? Because what I see, it's coming with a tech initiative. Speak to that, please.
So I'll be really interested to see this next round. January, you start to get a bunch of these reports, right? This next round of who the purchasers are and who the implementers are. And anecdotally, there's an awful lot of times when it is an IT organization. And at least in my own lived experience, the places where you see the best process work, the most incredible leapfrogs and efficiency is when you are spending time down in the weeds with the people really doing the work. And it can be dangerous to start with an as is process because you can get anchored on that process. But if you go to a to be process and you're not validating that with the people who are doing the work now, you'll miss all kinds of things. And Al, earlier you mentioned governance, and I cannot emphasize enough how critical governance is in these processes. First of all, upfront governance for what data exists, how they are defined. Your data quality forms a ceiling on what will be knowable and the quality of anything else you can do. But also governance of the process itself. Again, coming out of factories, we lived and died by statistical process control. So what are the healthy ranges? What are the red flags that tell you there's a problem? I worked in chemical plants. We'd blow up a city if we weren't being careful, right? The stakes are high. So how do you really make sure that you are putting in place those quality metrics, those process controls that we know how to do, at least we know how to think about? Anesthesiologists use these all the time. Airline pilots use these all the time. There are lots of examples of industries and professions that have figured out how to put guardrails and safety around a process that in many cases is largely autonomous. These are the same kinds of things that knowledge workers are going to have to figure out how to do. What are those things that a system can do on its own? What are those things that a system can do with supervision? What are those times when a system needs to push the pause button? And I think we can figure all of that out, but it'll take work, and it'll take the people who really live with the consequences, who really do the work to help make sure that that design is healthy, to make sure that it is holistic, to make sure that it is sustainable, and to make sure that it's really being thoughtful about solving the whole problems.
I thank you and more thank you. And I cannot celebrate enough that you said statistical process control and obviously program quality control and TQM and Six Sigma and Lean. There is a lineage to where we are now, and for you to reference part of that lineage it literally gives me chills because there is a through line here. And so it actually leads into my next question, and I want to get to Tomas's as well. The idea that who is in the room matters, like who it affects, who's going to live with the consequences. And you said at the outset that many of these have been IT initiatives. They have been maybe sitting in transformation, but HR I've seen has been left to deal with the repercussions of those decisions as opposed to have been actively involved up front to weigh in and identify the relationship equity that these people have, honoring the human potential within the system that they might assume will require fewer people over time. So my pointed question is this: having been in workforce strategy and HR, how does HR get into that conversation and be a key contributor to the actual decision on how things get rolled out and adopted and used on an ongoing basis, as opposed to being a quote unquote victim downstream to these decisions that were made elsewhere?
I can see that you have been reading a paper that Steve Hunt and John Golden and I did as well. So thank you for that reference. I think that there are a couple of things. First, contextually, this is the kind of work that organization development professionals have been doing for a really long time. And those of us in HR, particularly my background is biopsychology, those of us coming out of biopsychology, we are experts, not just in workers, but also in work. We're the people who've been doing job analyses. We're the people who've been defining skills that were necessary. We're the people who've been breaking things down into tasks. And so we have deep expertise not necessarily in the content of the expertise of the work. You absolutely need the business, you absolutely need subject matter experts for that. But the process of identifying and diagnosing these things, the process by which you can build a new business process, how you can think through critical things like decision rights, how you can think through critical things like team architecture and team functioning, whether that team is all people or that's a combination of people and bots. Those are things that people coming out of HR, people coming out of organization development, people coming out of professions like people analytics and biopsychology have deep decades of expertise in. And so when you have a business process that's being redesigned, one of my graduate school professors said you can either do a pilot test or you can do a really expensive, really public pilot test. And it's a little bit like that. You can either include the HR people on the front end and build out an effective, thoughtful business process with a higher likelihood of success, or you can throw some spaghetti at the wall and bring in the HR people to mop it up once you've already wasted time. So, and maybe had a lovely public failure as we've seen some examples of in this space. So the first is commercial for your IO colleagues and the second is you started by asking how people can do this. And this is where I kind of look at HR people and say, you need to do a couple of things. First, you need to be smart enough and expert enough in your own business processes, you need to have enough business acumen that you are able to fill out a credible conversation in these areas. Yes, I understand that in principle you can come in only with your diagnostic processes and be effective. I personally have found that at least being knowledgeable enough about the process you're seeking to change, to get your foot in the door, to establish trust, to establish credibility, and to show up with respect for the people that you are partnering with. I think that's really, really critical. So you have to do your homework. You have to show up and put in the time to care about what you're trying to fix. The second is you have to have some courage. You might not be invited. You might not be the very first call. Sometimes you're going to have to be a little bit assertive. You're going to have to use your whisper network and know where people are working on this. You have to show up and say, let me figure out how I can help you. Have you thought about these things? I'll often tell mentees and other folks the secret to success is not opening the door when opportunity knocks. It's figuring out where there should be a door and kicking the door. And occasionally you need to do that to be able to continue with one of these. And then when you're there, you got to show value. You have to help make things better, and then you get invited. So those are, I think, kind of the two sides of it. Develop some expertise, and then have some courage. Help with that.
Well, thank you for that. And it's actually, I'm going to take a leap a bit, but it also relates to the question Tomas has put forth. So I'm going to actually read it
Okay.
verbatim.
All right.
So would love to hear your comments, Alexis, on the relevance of the famous Peter Drucker line, quote, "Nothing is so useless as to do efficiently something that should not be done at all," end quote. And of course, this references your latest work or one of your recent articles on
Yeah.
BS jobs and the BS economy. So please.
Yeah, of course. And Tomas, twice in one day, I feel really, really lucky. I have thought about having that quote framed in my office for about 30 years. It has been a guiding principle. And when I was first doing business process work, that's a lot of what we did. We got rid of work that didn't need to be done at all. There's sort of an old, I don't know if it's a parable or a joke exactly, but the short version is cute little married couple, Thanksgiving, they're making their first turkey, and right before the turkey goes in the oven, the wife cuts off the turkey legs, and the husband's like, what are you doing? That's weird. And Christmas, they go and they visit her. I don't know, it's how my mom always did it. They go and visit her mom at Christmas, and right before the turkey goes in the oven, she cuts off the legs. And this new son-in-law is like, what is wrong with you people? And, New Year's Day, they go and they visit grandma in the nursing home because the mom was just like, I don't know, it's how grandma always did it. They go visit grandma in the nursing home, and this new now grandson-in-law is like, hey, grandma, everybody cuts off the turkey legs. They say this is because you did it. Does it make them juicier? What's happening? And she cackles as a older people sometimes do, and says, oh, honey, it's because our first oven was too small to fit a turkey. And so you have now 3 generations that are doing this thing that doesn't make any sense. It had a reason a long time ago, and it doesn't have a reason now. I spent a lot of my life getting rid of like the goldenrod copy of a form from triplicate that was in triplicate, right? Like how many of these things do you no longer need? How many things served a purpose at one time and no longer serve it? And we're seeing that in our IT stack. I'm seeing it in HRIS implementations of my past life, where they were designed perfectly to do one thing. They were designed to optimize transactions, but they're not giving you much information. They're not useful for training models because they're so devoid of context. So I think that there is something really powerful in not doing those things which shouldn't be done at all. And of course, part of what Tomas is referencing is this idea of an entire class of jobs that don't need to be done at all. An entire class of jobs, mostly white collar jobs, which have been pretty immune from this kind of efficiency for the past half a century that we've been doing this to blue and pink collar jobs. But those are things that, particularly now that we've got AI tools, we're realizing we're not adding any value whatsoever. And so as we have this moment to re-examine work, to really consider our work processes and rebuild them from scratch, you have an interesting opportunity to get rid of a lot of stuff that wasn't actually adding value. And I know there are a couple of Reddit threads now of people who are like feeding their job title into an LLM and they'll like explain it like I'm five. And they're kind of having existential crises like, oh my God, my job is so dumb. We also know that mattering is important. Meaning is important. So one of the things I'm hoping for as some of these bullshit jobs don't exist anymore, one of the things I'm hoping for is that we will thoughtfully build out new roles and opportunities. World Economic Forum, sort of everybody's saying we're going to have this net addition of jobs. We'll build out jobs that have more meaning, that have more purpose, that are closer to some kind of a value creation, whether that's a human value or it's a business value, but work that's better.
Well, I absolutely love and align with what you're saying. I also have, putting on my skeptic and looking at the real world hat, I see a lot of leaders, mostly outside of HR, looking at this as an efficiency play and say, hey, I understand that might happen in the future, but I'm going to let 10, 20% of my staff go in this particular business unit on the bet that these efficiency gains will happen. And I don't want to get sidetracked, but this, Elijah Goldblatt, the theory of constraints, and let's just put it in there and have people figure it out, and they'll create more, efficiency. So that logic could hold. However, to craft these new jobs of the future, at least in my view, to actually create the space to consciously create something that can add more value, can add critical value. That takes, use the word again, space and time to explore what's possible. And many are going too fast and they're losing not only that creativity, that intellectual capital, if you will, but they're also losing the relationship capital and they're compromising the cultures of their organizations by not taking the time to craft these new roles. Do you see that happening? And if so, how do we offset the risk? How do we effectively sell that there's this opportunity to get more competitive advantage and more sustainable innovation happening as opposed to just looking at short-term cost reduction?
Boy, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? And I don't think anybody is so naive as to believe that this set of transitions will be painless. There are already examples of organizations that are making, in my mind, mostly pretty short-sighted, lurching kinds of adjustments. If you look at the history of layoffs, and my friend Wayne Cassio has been studying layoffs since like the 70s, they don't normally stay small, right? And ones I've lived through, you cut X number of people and you turn around and 2 years later, you're back at the same headcount you were at. Often, this is a short-term measure for a variety of external reasons, not net headcount. And if we think about labor patterns and economic markets, some of the we're seeing good firms come up with good labor market data. There are shifts and adjustments. Some organizations are investing in reskilling to rehome people internally, whereas others are electing to let them go and just hire different people into those roles. But I think we are seeing a pretty enormous game of musical chairs, more so than a wholesale deletion of employment at large. If you look at the latest studies, we're seeing pretty flat results for most age groups and most professions. There's no denying the challenges faced by early career folks, particularly in areas of software design. Developers coming right out of school have a rough go of it. But even developers coming right out of school are only 20% down in net employment. It's not a complete apocalypse. So it is a restructuring. It will not be without pain, but every piece of current and historical evidence suggests that it is a navigable path. We will end up with more jobs than we started with. They'll just very likely be configured differently.
Well, let's speak to that real quick. I hit my microphone. Sorry about that. Let's speak to that real quick. Configured differently on that thread. Who's responsible for this? And to kind of see the answer a little bit, to create the jobs of the future, arguably the people best suited to do that are those closest to the work, employees themselves. And they may or may not be aware of the innovations that, or the productivity gains and efficiencies that are possible. So there would have to be some education and trust built that they are not just working themselves, out of a job. So, and I appreciate that there's, and with self-driving cars, obviously this is an executive, if you will, decision, and that's going to be propagated to a wide audience. But in other cases, it might be down to a very focused, specialized, set of activities that require specialized skills and tools. So, can you speak to how to maintain trust and culture amidst this ongoing transition? Because obviously this isn't going away.
It's interesting. I think the best companies will be the ones that make an effort to maintain that trust. And years ago, I saw a great meta-analysis of what trust was comprised of. So lots and lots of studies try and say, well, what really is it? And it turns out that it was really driven by three things. The first was like competence. Do people have like the ability to do the thing you're going to trust them for? But the other two really matter in this situation. One of them is integrity. Are people really going to do the things that they promised me? The things that they said they were going to do? Are they going to back that up? Or are they going to give me a bait and switch? Mm-hmm. And the last one was benevolence. Do I believe that this person or entity actually cares about me? Do I matter? And so I think organizations can do a lot to show that they have those last two characteristics. Individual managers and leaders can show that they have those last two characteristics of integrity and benevolence, that they are engaging with the folks who know how to do the work, that they are engaging with integrity. And if at the end of it there will be fewer jobs, they shouldn't lie about it. They should engage with benevolence that says we're going to offer reskilling opportunities. Here are the roles that are coming up. There are governance roles now. There are all kinds of roles in monitoring the agents we're building, is the example people bring up. And we will give you, the current employees, sort of first dibs on those. You're the ones who are designing them. So we want to engage with this set of characteristics. Not every organization is going to decide that they want to do that. Some are going to decide that they want to be more of a rip the Band-Aid kind of an organization. I would submit that particularly where you start to use humans as what my friend Sharna Wiblin refers to as fire extinguishers, right? You don't think about it very often, you don't want it very often, but by golly, when you need it, you better hope that it's working and accessible. So where you need people to be fire extinguishers, they're going to be a lot more effective if they're the ones who ran the process for 15 years beforehand. They know where all the bodies are buried. They know how to run that manual process if there's a Carrington event and the thing doesn't work anymore, right?
Mhm.
So there is a legitimate business need to maintain that ecosystem. I remember years and years and years ago, we had a guy who was actually at a chemical plant, a guy who really should have retired, and we made him this sort of like super duper Uber supervisor because he had been at that plant for 60 years from before, and this was 30 years ago. So think back, he'd started 90 years prior to today. Um, he's the one who knew from back in the 50s when the environmental regulations weren't as great. He knew where all the stuff was buried and what was buried where and all the sort of bits of history. And that knowledge wasn't something he would ever really be able to write down, but boy, they needed to be able to call him. Boy, they needed to know how that process ran. Boy, they needed to know how to keep things going. If something started to go funny, if the site flooded, they were going to need him to help with the environmental remediation. And so, how do we think about the people who really know the process, really know why we did something, really know the customer's priorities, really know how we got to that table architecture, whatever else it is, so that we can get through this period of transition and hopefully then be well positioned to be effective for quite a long time in the future.
Again, thank you for sharing that. And there's this notion of benevolence I'd like to pick up on because for many leaders struggle with, hey, I'm a nice person, but I got to make the tough calls. And I have to look out what's best for the business in a publicly traded organization. I have a fiduciary responsibility to do so. There's a lot of arguably excuses to take the hard line and underappreciate what the human value delivers day to day. And there's a lot of pressure, obviously, not only as I just shared, but there's peer pressure to look the part and all this. So please speak to that notion of staying in integrity, with oneself and their belief on human potential, and also looking out, for the business. And obviously, there's time pressure. If it's such a short-sighted viewpoint, then that's going to obviously weigh towards letting people go in this example. If there's a longer term view and seeking competitive advantage, then there might be more openness to honoring the human potential and more patience to create something new. So can you speak to that? And then I'm going to I know it's already a complex question, but I'm going to add a little sprinkle in because I have a tendency to do that. And in the interest of time, I want to make sure this gets addressed. Is you and I have been in the field in one form or another for a long time. And I just wrote about this. Like, not only have we been advocating for evidence-based decision making, we've been, drinking the Kool-Aid, but we've been making the Kool-Aid for a long time. And so, but the underlying assumption is that we are functioning as rational human beings, both individually and collectively. And as you know, Jeffrey Pfeffer, 20 plus years ago, wrote the knowing doing gap. So what you're saying and what we're alluding to is it makes sense, but it's not happening. So how do we actually do better at making it happen, creating the space for leaders and leadership teams to actually consume this insight in meaningful ways and take action on it, have it weighted higher than it has historically? So I know that's a massive question, so I apologize up front, but I just wanted to tie the previous concept together with this idea that we're just not behaving rationally as individuals and teams, oftentimes in part because of these pressures.
Wow, way to go really deep there, Al. So first, you started a question about how do you hold on to benevolence without being kind of a doormat and doing the things that have to be done. And the first is go back to that question of levels of analysis. Speaking as a person who has had to fire people and has had to lay people off, I do sincerely believe, not just as corporate girl, that it is entirely possible to be deeply caring about and benevolent towards about the health of the team and the organization when that means exiting someone from it and also treating that person with dignity, compassion, and support as they transition. Those are all very possible, and they're principles that I've embraced for a very, very long time. And I think that it is inhumane, really, not to do those things. I also think that that pays dividends in the way the language in the layoff world is like the survivor guilt, in the way the survivors are able to function long term, right? And additionally, there is a good deal of evidence, anecdotal and more rigorous, that shows just how disruptive a significant action can be and how long it can take an organization to get back to real functioning. And I've used an analogy in the past that really is, it's a pretty significant rupture of trust. And it's kind of like a marriage can survive an affair, but it's never the same. People use the analogy of, you can bang nails in a fence and then you can pull those nails back out of the fence, but the holes are still there. The scar tissue is still there. It changes the deal. It changes the relationships. It changes how work used to get done, and the scar tissue remains. So if you are not taking these kinds of actions in a way that is really thoughtful, and I would argue sort of caring and benevolent when they are necessary to ensure the survival of the organism, then I think you're doing harm. To the question of how we have influence, and boy, you said we've not only been drinking the Kool-Aid, we've been making the Kool-Aid. I think influence is the most underappreciated leadership attribute. Years and years and years ago at a former company, I won't shout out which one, just to protect the confidentiality, but did a whole bunch of longitudinal research. It was about 5 years in this study where I had great data on our full suite of sort of leader attributes. And I'll short circuit the conversation by saying everybody expected technical skill to be the thing that sort of got you on a hypo list, kept you on a hypo list, helped you accelerate your promotions faster than your peers, helped you accelerate your compensation faster than your peers. They thought it was all technology and technical capability all day long. That only explained like 2% of the variance. It was really small. It turned out that the thing that explained the variance was your ability to influence. And there's a distinction, I think an important one, between convincing, which is sort of like arguing harder, and influencing, which starts with knowing what's important to that other person. It's not just arguing your point. It's understanding theirs. It's finding mutual benefit. It's creating coalitions. It's pursuing things that are genuinely mutually beneficial, not just badgering people into your point of view. And so I think part of what we need to be doing as a community in people analytics, et cetera, is not just swaggering around and saying, look how smart we are, we have this finding, peace. And rather starting with that business problem, building it in partnership with whoever's going to own that thing once you're done inventing on it, right? Making sure that they have a stake, making sure that they have a say, making sure it's something they want to inherit and not something you are shoving on them. So I think that if nothing else, are you going to go look for an influence book? I think influence is just enormously important. So there we go.
So I can't recommend this enough. And if you don't
Oh,
want to
I've not read that one.
it's absolutely fantastic. And if you don't
I'm
want
going
to
to go
read
get it.
the whole book, Brene Brown did a Dare to Lead two-part podcast with Anand Giridharadas, which is absolutely fantastic. But it echoes a lot of what you are talking about. And it's not our job
Great.
to convince others, it's to understand their belief systems. And it's actually one of the inspirations for me writing my myths series, understanding the myths that we carry that are holding us back from seeking a deeper truth and thus taking more appropriate action on behalf of individuals as well as the organizations that we're serving. So I could not celebrate enough, what you're sharing. It's just, and to your point, it's not often taught in schools, and it's underserved within corporate learning programs. It's like, so where do you learn how to listen, and you stay in affirmative inquiry, compassionate curiosity, that growth mindset, beginner's mind, all those things. And in turn, being able to advocate and stay in integrity with yourself, but also find that compromise, that ability to elevate others and give them space to move differently. So yeah, I'm excited that you brought that up.
About 15 minutes ago, I talked about how important it was to figure out where there should be a door and kick a hole in the wall. And that is absolutely true in my belief system. But also, I was just talking to my partner literally this morning about how I think the sort of corporate empowerment industry has sold people on a story that's not always helpful about needing the way they need to show up, where they need to show up with a lot of power and a lot of confidence in a way that often is translated to showing up with a lot of arrogance, not listening, not being curious. And in trying to teach confidence, I think sometimes we have missed an opportunity to look at humility. And I think there is something really, really powerful in being able to manage the tension between those two things. Just like I referenced Tomas earlier, the new book that's coming out around authenticity at work. And maybe too much authenticity is a problem. How do you manage that tension between being sufficiently authentic that people can have trust in you and you are not having to sort of harm your own mental health by denying your fundamental humanity, but also behave in ways that are appropriate and effective and respectful. And I think there's some, like most things in life, there's some real tension to manage in that whole constellation of things where confidence matters a lot, but so does humility.
Yeah, and in the ideal world, at least in my view, they work together. I mean, obviously, it takes
They
confidence
do.
to be humble, and if you are
Yeah.
humble, you learn more, and that elevates not only your confidence, but the perception of the confidence that you have with others. So, yeah, and here we are. Yeah, there you go. We're consultants. Here's a two by two.
Sorry. There's a two by two for everything.
I celebrated. No apologies. Speaking of Tomas, he kindly agreed to join this LinkedIn Live on Monday, September 22nd. So make sure you come back for that.
Terrific.
I want to just celebrate Rob Barker. Thank you for your questions and comments. Definitely get to you as a follow up. And if you've joined for the session, thank you for being here. Alexis, as we start to wrap up here, I got two more reasonably quick questions.
Okay.
One is something that is very dear to me, and I know it's dear to you, given we're both, parents of young people. Mine are 24 and 22 now. And so, what is your advice to people in their late teens and early 20s, given what's happening with AI and just the very nature of work itself?
I think my advice has actually been pretty consistent for a long time, and that is don't be afraid of the squiggle. You're not supposed to have it all figured out when you're 22. Do lots of things because you will be surprised at the ways they are valuable to you in the future. So, just to speak for myself, at those approximately those ages, I spent a period of time in professional theater, which, as it turns out, has been remarkably helpful as I seek to influence people because I think about costume and body and voice and message in a way that's really different. And I really got rid of my stage fright and my concern about looking like a fool. Doing some musical theater will hammer that right out of you. And then built IT systems, right? No business building because I could code and people didn't have very much budget. And so I did all kinds of things that I thought were just dumb and a way to make a buck or in the case of theater, put a roof over my head. I tell you, I wasn't making much. And those have paid dividends years and years. And so the first is don't freak out if your first job isn't perfect. It's not going to be like a TV show. Don't be afraid of the squiggle. And almost any occupation will be valuable to you in the future. It's a matter of taking the learning out of it. So I think there is an enormous amount of uncertainty right now that I can't sugarcoat over. But again, I look at my own experiences, I look at the experiences of young people that I appreciate, And then I go back to the experiences of my parents and grandparents and how they carried those forward. My grandfather worked in a shoe store during the Depression. Let me tell you, it influenced the choices that went on my children's feet, right? These things will have ripple effect, and it is okay.
Well, thank you for that, and I'm going to share that with my kids. So the final question is, what's next for you? I know you're going to be at HR Tech next week, HR Technology Conference next week. We'll see you there.
Yeah.
Look forward to your session. Beyond that, what's coming up for you?
Oh, so much great stuff. So yes, I'll be at HR Tech. I've got 3 sessions scheduled. I'm really excited about it. Following that, October will be exciting. The Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology's Leading Edge Consortium, it's a lot of words, conference is coming up at the end of October in Atlanta. I get to do a keynote on some fun stuff I've been working up, and then a pre-conference workshop, actually on ROI and value, which has been a lifelong thread for me. The week following that, I get to go give a keynote at Seattle's AI Week, which is going to be baller. And then I'm cooking up a few things with my friends and colleagues at the University of Southern California's Center for Effective Organizations around some AI implementation and some org design stuff. So there'll be some neat stuff coming down the pike in 2026 with that group of colleagues. So really excited to play with the future of work and AI and just having a ball.
All right. Well, Alexis, thank you for sharing. Thank you for being your awesome self. I imagine, what's the best way to follow you and get in touch? Here on LinkedIn? Yeah.
I am, and there are not that many Alexis Fink, so I'm pretty easy to find. I'm the only one who plays in people analytics, so you'll be able to pick me out, and that's usually the best way to track me down. I do try to at least look at my DMs occasionally, and that's the best way to find me.
All right, Alexis. Well, again, thank you so much, and you be well. See you soon.
Thank you, friend.